When I released my video, How WarCraft 3 Makes You a Monster, I didn't realize how torn the WarCraft community was when it came to the subject of Arthas' morality. I just assumed in the video that we all understood him as a bad guy, and the focus of the video was how the level design in the mission The Culling makes us act and behave just as Arthas would. But because of the amazing comments you guys left, I decided to look into this further and found this video here. So today, I'm going to do a response to this video.
After a culminating battle in which the best forces of Azeroth faced off against the Lich King Arthas, we get this final scene after his runeblade Frostmorn is shattered, and all of the souls he's captured over the years are released, and he's talking to the soul of his dead father, simply asking him if his nightmare is finally over. Generally, when a bad guy is killed at the end of his expansion, they don't have remorse over what they've done. They usually go down kicking and screaming, or out with a whimper, but not asking if they can finally stop and rest.
Okay, so this is a great start to his video, but here's the thing, that is what makes him a tragic hero, that he was a good person that had a downfall due to a flaw, but that doesn't make him a good guy at this point.
You see, Arthas is one of the most popular villains in the WarCraft series, and it's generally because his story is a tragic one, of a guy who just wanted to do the right thing, and was willing to do anything to do the right thing.
If anything, this makes him even worse, because the actions he took, the actions that bit by bit stripped him of his humanity, the sacrifices he made to save his people, turned him into a weapon of the enemy, used to destroy everything he had sworn to protect, the very reason he took those initial actions.
Only to fail anyway and become a villain. You see, Arthas as a boy, and even a young adult, was a very nice and kind-hearted man. The death of his horse Invincible greatly ate him up inside, since he died in an accident that entirely could have been avoided if Arthas wasn't being an idiot.
Okay, so here we are building up his pre-WarCraft 3 identity, which is great. I'm glad they did, because if all we had to go off of was Arthas' story in WarCraft 3, he'd pretty much just come off as a psychopath. But because his story has been expanded, we truly see why he is a tragic hero.
Arthas was trying to race back home in a snowstorm on his favorite horse Invincible, and he wanted to do a really cool trick of jumping over a short ravine that he'd done a million times before. But the back hoof of Invincible slipped on some ice while they were going for the jump and caused them both to crash. And this crash completely tore up two of Invincible's legs to the point where it was either going to bleed to death before they could possibly get help, or freeze to death. Either way, Invincible was done for. There was really only one option for him. Despite the fact that he broke some of his ribs in the fall, and his face and limbs were numb from the cold, he somehow managed to move himself closer to his dying horse. "This is all my fault. I deserve this," Arthas said as he removed his sword from his hilt. Invincible regarded him very calmly, almost as if he knew what had to be done and accepted his fate. That caused Arthas' eyes to tear up, but he blinked them away, pulled out his sword, and then pierced his heart with a single blow. Then he collapsed. Sometime later, some people found him and helped him bury his horse, and it's at this point where he thought to himself, should anyone else ever need protection, or if sacrifices had to be made for the welfare of others, he would do whatever it takes.
So this is a moment that obviously foreshadows the Culling, and provides the reasoning why Arthas was able to come so quickly to his decision in the Culling. But here's the problem with this scenario. In this scenario, he absolutely did the right thing, but that doesn't exactly translate the same way when it comes to the Culling mission.
And it's this mantra that led him down the dark path which would be his ruin. As sometime later, when the Cult of the Damned started spreading the plague throughout his kingdom, Arthas was chasing down Kel'Thuzad and had gone through dozens of villages which had been infected by the plague. So he knew exactly what was going to happen, and how almost impossible it was to change anything.
How almost impossible it was to change anything. Remember that.
So when he came to a city which had already been infected by the plague, he made the tough decision to cull the entire city before it could spread any further. When Uther came, he didn't know much about the plague yet. He wasn't an expert on what it did to people or how fast it spread like Arthas was. And he knew what he was asking didn't seem reasonable to people who didn't have the same information he had. It wasn't possible to explain to him and then convince him of what was going on. So instead, he ordered his men to work with him and dismissed Uther, who was doing nothing but slowing him down.
I'm going to play a clip of the guy who designed this mission to explain the problem with this logic.
Let's look at the culling from the standpoint of what you're doing in the mission. You're going into a city plagued with diseased grain to murder the civilians before Mal'Ganis can rush them into becoming zombies. Zombies eventually become ghouls, that's canon, but dead bodies become abominations. It just takes longer. Or they can be raised into skeletons by necromancers. So every indication here says that killing all these people will do literally nothing, but he does it anyways because of a petty competition with the Dreadlord.
Arthas needs all the help he can get. In fact, according to Medivh, the humans alone can't defeat the undead. The land is already lost. So to think Arthas could beat Mal'Ganis alone is insane.
So he went into the city with his men and started purging the city. He knew it had to be done. He was killing people now who were already doomed to be turned into the undead anyway, and he was going to save countless others by stopping the spread of the infection.
I get why Arthas made that decision. When I first played the game, I came to the same conclusion as Arthas, as I think most of us did. It was the lesser of two evils to spare the citizens of Stratholme from an even worse fate. But is that even the case? What you do in Stratholme changes absolutely nothing. The only argument you have left here is that it is a better option than turning to the undead. But is that even true? Unlike the scenario with Invincible, these are autonomous human beings with free will. So I've been recently replaying the human campaign, and on the very first mission, you have to save this kid named Timmy. Now, a few missions later, after you beat an army of the undead, you find a cage, just like the one little Timmy was stuck in mission 1. If you attack that cage, there is a ghoul inside that's an ally, and his name is Timmy. This clearly shows us that humans are being turned into ghouls, but Timmy doesn't attack you, which shows that the undead can have free will, but that's a topic for another time.
But a part of him just couldn't handle it. He was a nice person, so having to exterminate an entire city of people just wouldn't sit well with him no matter how justified it was in his mind.
So from Warcraft 3 to World of Warcraft to the books, all of them show that this mission is what began the downfall of Arthas. And the reason that this is because deep down this must have violated some sense of intrinsic goodness. It was something he was traumatized doing, something he didn't want to do, but the thing that he felt was the only option for him to do for the greater good. His suffering was the cost that needed to be paid to save his kingdom. That is the worldview he adopts. He betrayed himself by committing this act, and it led him down a road that destroyed everything he sacrificed himself to protect. It made his sacrifice at Stratholme mean nothing. If he had listened to his conscience, had he stayed united with Uther and Jaina, perhaps they could have had a chance.
That's why he was desperate for power when chasing down Mal'Ganis in Northrend afterwards. Mal'Ganis was taunting Arthas to go into Northrend in order to pick up the Frostmorn. And since Arthas had already gone so far anyway, and he thought Mal'Ganis was behind everything, he was easily tricked into finding the blade and picking it up.
He was easily tricked because, as a tragic hero, Arthas' main flaws are his uncontrolled anger that overrides his logical reasoning and his love for his kingdom so much that he is willing to sacrifice himself. This video seems to be implying that it's not Arthas' fault that he was being tricked, and that in and of itself is a very tricky debate. But when it comes to Arthas' character, here's the way I see it. It wasn't his fault he was tricked, but here's the thing. In life we don't always get to choose what happens to us, but we do get to choose how we respond. Arthas is so blinded by his flaws that he doesn't realize he's falling into a trap. But lucky for him, he had more objective friends and mentors who all would give him their opinion when it was needed, and he always refused to think about their perspective and even take it into consideration, which is the third flaw, the one that makes him absolutely responsible for his actions, even if he was being tricked because his friends weren't.
Where he then immediately struck down the Dreadlord. You see, I like to think of Arthas as two separate people. The one before he took up the Frostmorn, and the one afterwards.
I'd say that from a storyteller's perspective, the Death Knight Arthas is a representation of what in Jungian psychology is called the shadow. The shadow is a deep, dark, repressed part of a person's personality, incompatible with the normal self. I agree that there are essentially two different Arthases we see, but I don't think this absolves him from how he behaves as a Death Knight, as it seems that, although influenced by Ner'zhul through Frostmorn, Frostmorn, he still has some degree of self-control. This is also interesting to me because there's a similarity between Arthas and Anakin Skywalker here. Anakin was prophesized as the chosen one. Arthas was the heir to the throne. Anakin was a Jedi. Arthas was a paladin. They both had tremendous expectations placed on them, and they were both part of orders that would have been discouraged or even forbidden from exploring their shadow sides. Carl Jung believes that integrating the shadow was vital for personal growth, and both Arthas and Anakin were lacking in this area. They didn't have much experience in navigating their darker emotions like the anger they both felt, because they weren't properly trained to deal with those emotions, and that lack of experience was exploited in both of them by the Emperor and Mal'Ganis and Ner'zhul.
The one before was someone who just wanted to save his people. So he was doing lots of morally gray things because in his mind, the ends justify the means.
He wanted to save people, the ends justify the means. Let me ask you this, did he save his people? What were the ends? It doesn't matter what your intentions are, those are there to guide you. What matters is what you do, and what Arthas did was massacre a city, burn down his men's ships, and killed one of his best friends, all before he goes on to kill his father and then practically genocide the High Elves. Need I go on?
And after he picked up the sword, his personality got twisted and turned, and he was a much different person who had goals that no longer aligned with his past self, but still had all of the memories from the previous Arthas. The post-Frostmorn Arthas had goals of freeing the Lich King from the Legion's control, and then afterwards its goals were a little bit more self-oriented, of freeing himself from Ner'zhul's control and getting the world ready for an eventual Legion invasion, since both the Frostmorn and the Helm of Domination were very powerful artifacts that belonged to the Legion, and they were very much going to want them back someday. This new Arthas knew he could basically end all life on Azeroth whenever he wanted, since he had an unstoppable undead army who only grew in strength every time he clashed with the new kingdom. If he wanted to, he could just let loose all of his undead hordes in order to turn everyone else undead, and then he would have his whole army set in stone, and he would simply just prepare for the eventual Legion invasion. Although he never did let his undead loose to turn the entire world undead. He could have at basically any point. There were undead basically everywhere, and they replenished their own forces. But he just never did for some reason.
Yeah, so just because you could end the world and you decide not to doesn't exactly make you a good person.
And it's later on that we learn it's because a part of Arthas from before the Frostmorn was holding him back the entire time.
Again, this is irrelevant. I'm starting to think we just have a different opinion on what being a good person means. I get that at this point we've differentiated Arthas the Paladin and Arthas the Death Knight or Lich King, and that saying the small part of Arthas the Paladin is the part that is good means the true Arthas is good. But even when he had full autonomy over himself, he still chose to do bad things, so I'm not exactly sure that is true.
There was a small part of him which had the personality of the original Arthas, and it kind of just put some mental blocks on him to act in certain ways, which didn't end the world immediately. When you do eventually kill Arthas, you find that he kept Jaina's locket on him the entire time, and Jaina even says herself that there was probably a small part of Arthas inside the monster he turned into. And I think these two things are some of the best examples of a theory that Arthas was kind of trapped inside the Lich King in some way after he took up the Frostmorn. And I have two possible explanations for how this might have happened.
He conveniently forgets to mention Sylvanas' blood, something that was taken after he became a Death Knight, which just goes to show it was still Arthas.
For one, it could have been more literal in that the original Arthas was trapped inside, and he just watched as the monster did everything using his memories and body. And the second one is that Arthas himself was doing everything, the Frostmorn did corrupt him and didn't create a second personality, but that his old personality simply conflicted with his new one, which made him act in odd ways momentarily.
The shadow theory confirmed.
Like keeping Jaina's locket and not immediately ending all life on Azeroth. I mean, he did plan on doing it eventually, but the fact that he didn't do it immediately was heavily hinted because of a small part of him that was trying to keep himself in control. As his plan during the Wrath of Lich King expansion was to train up the strongest unstoppable fighters and then have them come to a citadel where he would test them, and then kill them and raise them as his personal bodyguard, the vetted, best possible warriors for his new undead army that he would use to fight the Legion. And I think this second theory is a little bit more likely, because it doesn't seem like there was an original Arthas trapped inside his body, since the Lich King did cut out his own heart in order to rid himself of his human side, which is found by players through a quest chain in Icecrown, which culminates with Tyrion destroying the heart and weakening the Lich King. So if there was a part of Arthas trapped inside of him, his heart would have definitely been it, and he got rid of that. Which is why it's more likely that the curse of the Frostmorn corrupted his mind, made him want to do all of these things, and was kind of like a forced magical mind control type situation. Or, a standard personality curse. And that's why when the Frostmorn was destroyed, and his forced personality curse was lifted, he was able to show remorse, and realize the nightmare he had just lived through, which he willingly did himself, and then was glad that it was finally all over.
So obviously he was tormented when he was the Lich King and the Death Knight. It seems to me, just watching this, that there is more of a difference between Death Knight Arthas and the Lich King than there is from Paladin Arthas and Death Knight Arthas. I don't want to downplay the fact that his immediate action is to express remorse. That just goes to show that goodness inside him still exists, and that's what makes him a tragic, sympathetic character. I do feel bad for Arthas. Being manipulated sucks, and we have the saying that hindsight is 20/20. I'm sure if Arthas could live his life over again, he'd make way better decisions, but I think it is important to distinguish between feeling sympathy and judging someone as good, purely based on their internal nature, which is subjective, and we only have access to his subjectivity because he is a fictional character.
But unfortunately, only darkness waited before him. Because even if he was finally free from his living nightmare, he was the one who ultimately made all the decisions that led him to getting tricked into become the Lich King in the first place.
Exactly.
He didn't have to chase Mal'Ganis down to Northrend. Chasing Mal'Ganis in Northrend was more of an obsession than it was something he needed to do.
I addressed this point earlier. He was tricked into going because he was manipulated through his anger, hubris, and sense of duty,
as he never actually went back to Lordaeron to talk to his dad and better prepare them for the plague. He thought he could end everything on his own if he just stopped Mal'Ganis in Northrend. He could have taken time to explain the culling of Stratholme to Uther better, or even come up with a more reasonable plan for dealing with it.
Exactly. Again, there were better options, and yes, that very well could have potentially meant the citizens of Stratholme might have suffered more, but we'd still probably have the High Elves and have had a fighting chance against the undead.
And he could not have been so efficient at killing things after becoming the Lich King. The only thing he really held back on was the not literally killing everybody thing. But even with his mistakes, it's not really fair to blame what eventually happened to him, having his personality twisted and corrupted, when he had good intentions the entire time.
Okay, are you kidding me? This is ridiculous. It's not fair to judge him based off his actions when he had good intentions the whole time. I recommend you look into the Nuremberg trials.
There's this old saying, we judge ourselves based on our intentions, and others based on their actions. Arthas' intentions were always good, even if he was a little bit too obsessed with Mal'Ganis. He was only obsessed because he thought killing him would fix the problem quickly.
No, that was the excuse he was telling himself. He was obsessed because this monster was destroying his land, and as he saw it, forced him to commit the culling, an act that deeply traumatized him. He went after Mal'Ganis because he wanted revenge, and the thought that he could do it quicker, that was hubris, it wasn't logic.
But he was also very pissed at what Mal'Ganis had made him do with Stratholme, that his obsession is kind of reasonable if you really think about it. He had someone who he knew was responsible for the death of an entire city, plus a whole bunch of small neighboring towns. And since he cared about his people greatly, and since he had a mantra to protect people no matter what it took, it was kind of inevitable. When Arthas found the rune blade and he was told that it was cursed, he had the mantra that he was willing to sacrifice anything for the welfare of others, and he'd be selfish not to sacrifice himself after what he'd done to Stratholme.
Again with the sacrificing himself thing. Yeah, at first glance it sounds noble, but Arthas is the protector and future king. If he sacrifices himself, who takes up that role? This, as with most tragic hero stories, is a warning. It's supposed to teach us what to avoid, how to say true to what we believe is right, how to make good decisions. To make excuses is to ignore the whole point of the story.
So he picked up the blade and made the worst decision of his life, because it all made sense for him to do that. And there was almost no way he wouldn't based on his intentions and personal mantra. It's almost tragic in a sense,
It's not almost tragic, it's absolutely tragic.
His actions ultimately ended up being so evil to the point where no one considers Arthas a good person in lore. Everyone knows that he took up the cursed blade and killed a whole bunch of people, but everything in his life kind of led to that, as well as forces outside of his control directly manipulating him into that decision. Ultimately, he did make the decision himself, but it was always from a place of good. He wanted to do the right thing. He was willing to sacrifice himself in order to do the right thing.
It doesn't matter that he wanted to do the right thing, and it sucks that he was tricked. But had he kept his emotions under control, had he slowed down and made more careful decisions, he wouldn't have been tricked.
He just didn't know he was being tricked. He didn't know he'd be mind controlled and cursed to willingly end his kingdom himself, as he marched into Lordaeron and killed his own father with the cursed blade. He then went on to kill many more people, including 90% of the High Elves, and had planned on killing everyone else eventually, so that he could prepare himself to fight the Legion. Not because he thought defeating the Legion would be a good thing, but because as the Lich King Arthas, the Legion was also a threat to him, as the person in charge of the Legion could cleave his planet in half. And there's not much an unstoppable army of undead can do about your planet literally being destroyed. So, did Arthas actually do anything wrong? You might say his actions point to yes, but in context and taking his intentions into account. He was never trying to do the wrong thing, and his intentions absolutely matter in these kinds of situations. And you can't really blame Arthas for something a cursed blade forced him to do. So, of the Lich King, the whole of it, the Helm of Domination, the Rune Blade, Ner'zhul, they were absolutely bad dudes who did bad things for selfish reasons. And Arthas was just kind of caught up in all of it because he was tricked. And it really all depends on how much one can blame a person who was tricked into doing bad things. So if we go based off purely intentions, excluding cursed mind control shenanigans, no, I don't think Arthas was in the wrong. But if you look at his actions and what he accomplished, ignoring all of the context, then he is without a doubt one of the most evil people in lore. So it's all up to you to draw your own conclusions, because Arthas did nothing wrong.
Alright, this was a great video. Really interesting perspective, and I like how he ends it with showing both sides, and showing how based on his actions he is one of the most evil people in lore. The part I would argue though, obviously, is the internal goodness, his true nature if you will. If that is inherently good, then betraying that nature is even worse than just his actions alone. Ultimately though, his intentions mean nothing, because his actions speak for themselves. So one final thing I want to say before I end this is that I'm not saying entirely that you can just completely throw out the importance of a person's intentions and their nature. There's the famous philosophical argument over would you steal a loaf of bread to feed your starving family? That is a perfect example of when your intentions and your actions kind of conflict. The problem with Arthas though is that I don't feel that this is equivalent in any way, because when we look at all of Arthas's actions, every single one of those actions have another choice that he could have made that would have resulted in a better outcome for everyone. And each subsequent mistake that he made just made everything worse. So even if you accept or believe that intentions are absolutely important, Arthas is still acting in a way that negates that point, so it's completely irrelevant. So that's just my final thoughts on that. But what do you guys think? Let me know down in the comments. Well, that's it for today. I'll see you guys next time.